Picture this. 1981, a murder trial, and the defense. The devil made me do it. Crazy, right?
It sounds like something straight out of a horror movie.
And it is. We're doing a deep dive on the case that inspired The Conjuring. The devil made me do it.
Yeah, this wasn't just some Hollywood invention. This was a real-life case that grabbed everyone's attention, made people really think about this stuff. It even, forced the courts to consider, could demonic possession actually be a thing in the legal system? How do you even process that?
It's wild. And we've got these excerpts, like a super in-depth look at the movie that'll help us pick apart the real stuff from the stuff they made up for the screen.
Exactly, because it wasn't just about one guy and whether he was guilty, It became this whole public debate about free will. If you're controlled by something else, are you responsible? And what does that even mean for the law?
So the movie's got Ed and Lorraine Warren, right? Those paranormal investigators.
Oh yeah, they were huge, especially after those Amityville horror cases.
Exactly. And our source says they weren't just, consultants on this. They were really in the thick of it, helping defend Arnie Johnson.
They were key, almost like a link between the normal world and the supernatural stuff the defense was using. And the movie does a cool thing. It doesn't just show what happened, but also how the Warrens played into it, their beliefs, how they dealt with this whole insane situation.
So it wasn't just Hollywood bringing in the big names for the drama. They were a real part of this whole thing. But hold on, they got involved even before Arnie Johnson was in the picture, right? It started with a kid named David Glatzel.
Yeah, the movie starts with this terrifying possession of David, this really intense exorcism scene. And that's when Arnie Johnson steps up, crazy brave, and basically says to the demon, "Take me instead."
Whoa, and it actually works. The demon goes into him.
That's the creepy part. The film shows this, transference of evil, and right away, Arnie is not the same. And the eyes, we see these little changes, something's off with him.
It's that classic horror thing, right? We see the monster under the surface, but nobody else knows what's up yet.
Totally. And the people around him, they're reacting to these weird vibes he's giving off, but they don't know what's happening. And we're just thinking oh man, when's it all gonna hit the fan? And the movie really takes its time getting to the actual murder, which makes it even creepier.
Okay, so we've got this buildup, this awful feeling that something's coming. But before we get into the murder, how does the film show the possession? Because we're talking about an actual demon, right? That could get pretty intense visually.
You'd think it would be all crazy visuals and special effects, but it's not. The real horror comes from inside Arnon, his fear, the fact that he's losing himself. It's more psychological,
So it's more about the terror of losing control, being taken over by something awful.
Exactly. And it's scary because you relate to Arnon, you feel for him, even though he's doing terrible things, but then bam, the movie switches gears. We go from supernatural horror to, a courtroom drama.
Which is where it gets truly bizarre. They actually use demonic possession as a defense in court for murder.
Oh yeah, they went there. And as you can imagine, it didn't go over well with everybody. The film shows how much skepticism the Warrens faced, from the lawyers, the judge, even the jury.
I bet. It's one thing to believe that stuff, but to convince a whole courtroom. How do you even start to prove something like that?
That's what's so interesting. How do you make the invisible visible? How do you argue that something beyond our world, beyond what the law understands, can be held responsible? The movie captures that weirdness so well.
So did they buy it? Did this devil made me do it defense actually work in court?
Well...
Wouldn't want to spoil it for you.
Of course not, of course not. But it brings up this huge question. What if someone really believes they were possessed? Even if they do something terrible, can we blame them? How do we separate the person from the demon? Yeah, there's no easy answer to that. It's something the film really digs into. It makes us confront the unknown and how it messes with our ideas of justice, free will, everything.
And that leads us to another part of the story. Because it's not just about the murder and the trial. The movie throws in this whole occultist character. Who is that, and were they a real part of the case?
That's where Hollywood gets creative. They needed a human bad guy, someone to represent evil on purpose. Arn, he's more of a victim in all this.
So they wanted someone who chose the darkness, who went after it intentionally, unlike Arn's situation.
Exactly. The occultist is all about chasing evil, while Arnie not caught in something way over his head.
It's so cool how the movie mixes it all up, the true crime, the courtroom drama, and then the supernatural horror with the occultist.
Yeah.
Keeps you guessing where the real evil is coming from.
Right, and that's what makes it so effective. Because even though the occultist is made up, it plays on this really deep fear The idea that someone out there is messing with dark forces, bringing evil into our world.
And that's almost scarier than just a random demonic possession, isn't it? Because it means someone's doing it on purpose. It makes you wonder.
It makes you wonder if the scariest things out there are the ones we create ourselves.
Okay, so we've got the real case, the made-up stuff, but what about the message? What's the Conjuring? The devil made me do it, really trying to say.
It's like all those Conjuring movies, there's always something deeper going on. And in this one, I think it's that whole idea of love being stronger than evil.
Right. Like you've got Ed and Lorraine. Their relationship's a huge part of these movies. They have this bond, this strength, even when things get terrifying.
Exactly. It's not just romantic love, though that's there too. It's their faith, how they're totally committed to each other, and how they really care about the people being messed with by this darkness. Love is like their fuel.
Which is really interesting because you've also got Arn and Debbie, their love story. They're young, totally in love, and she never gives up on him, even when everyone else thinks he's lost it.
And that's what makes it so sad. It's like even the purest love, maybe it's not always enough against this kind of evil. Makes you think about how strong we can be, how much love can handle.
So if love isn't always enough, what chance do we have against something like that?
And the film doesn't shy away from that question. It's like, it's asking us, what do WE believe in enough to fight for, even when it's scary, when we're not sure?
So we've got love, but there's also faith, especially with the Warrens. But then you've got the occultist, and their beliefs are a bit different.
Totally. It's like the film is saying that what you believe can be good or bad. The Warrens, their faith makes them stronger, but it's also tested like crazy.
And then there's the occultist, choosing the dark side, fully embracing evil.
Exactly. You've got this contrast that makes you think about what it means to believe in something. What do we put our faith in? What happens when it's shaken, when someone uses it for bad stuff? It's a big question for everyone, not just the characters.
It's what makes it more than just a horror movie, right?
Right.
You've got demons, murder, but it's also about bigger stuff like faith, love, good versus evil.
You got it. And it works because it's still a story that feels real, you know? It gets to you, even with the supernatural stuff.
It makes you wonder, if you were on that jury, how could you decide? How do you balance the facts of the crime with this idea of demonic possession?
That's the legacy of this case. It really got people thinking, and it's still something we talk about because it comes down to something deeper than whether demons are real.
What do you mean?
Well, the movie and the case itself, they show us that humans are capable of anything good or evil. And how do we deal with that? How do we understand it? How do we judge it? Those are questions we're always going to ask.
This deep dive has turned everything I thought I knew about this case upside down. I mean, the devil made me do it sounds crazy at first. But the film, the real events, it's so much more complicated than that.
Totally. It's about the limits of what we can understand, what our legal system can handle, even what we believe as people.
So if you're listening and you saw the movie, maybe you thought it was just a wild ride. Hopefully this gives you something else to think about.
And if you haven't seen it, this case, the way they use it in the Conjuring world, it's really something else. True crime, horror, makes you think about big questions. It's got it all.
It definitely stays with you. But there's one thing we haven't really gotten into yet, the actual trial. What evidence did they use? How did they even argue for the whole demonic possession thing in court?
Now that's where it gets really interesting. The movie touches on the trial, but it doesn't go into the details, you know?
Right, they got to keep things moving. But that's what we're all about here, digging into those details. So let's go back to that courtroom and see how this crazy defense actually played out. All right, so we're back in the courtroom, 1981, and this wild defense demonic possession is on the table. What were the prosecutors even thinking?
Can you imagine trying to argue against that? They had their work cut out for them. The prosecution, they stuck to the facts, you know? They built their case around what they could prove. They were saying that Arne Johnson's actions, they were his own. Maybe he was influenced by stuff going through something, but it wasn't some, like, demon pulling the strings.
So they weren't saying demons don't exist. It was more like, that's not how we do things in court.
Exactly. They were like, look, believe what you want, but the law needs proof. So they focused on Arne Johnson's mental state, what he was doing before the murder, anything that could explain why he did it.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
But the defense? They had the Warrens, these big-time paranormal guys.
Yeah.
What kind of evidence did they bring in?
This is where it gets really interesting. The Warrens actually testified. They talked about the kid, David Glatzel, the one they thought was possessed, and how Arne Johnson got involved. They talked about their investigation, tried to show that there was a connection between this demonic thing and what Arne Johnson did.
So they're talking about seeing supernatural events, maybe showing photos or recordings from their investigations. Did the court actually accept that?
That's the thing. The Warrens, they could talk about their experiences, but the judge, he said most of their evidence wasn't allowed, especially anything that directly proved demons were real.
Yeah, that makes sense. You can't just bring a Ouija board into a murder trial.
Exactly. It was this weird situation, right? This crazy defense. But the court still had to follow the rules. And those rules, they didn't really have room for the supernatural.
So if they couldn't use the supernatural stuff, how did they try to convince the jury? Did they have any arguments that, like, fit into a regular legal case?
They did. And this is why people are still talking about this case today. The defense, they basically said that Arne Johnson wasn't in control when he committed the murder. They compared it to cases where someone pleads insanity or isn't mentally fit to stand trial. They were saying that even if the jury didn't believe in the demon, something was wrong with Arne Johnson. He wasn't in his right mind.
So they were saying that whatever caused it, demon or not, he wasn't responsible because of his mental state.
You got it. They argued that this possession, whether it was real or just in his head, it messed him up so badly that he didn't know what he was doing.
Man, that's a tough one to wrap your head around. Legally, morally, it brings up so many questions. And it shows you why this case is so interesting. It makes us really think about free will, responsibility, if we're always in control of our own minds.
For sure. It makes you wonder, if someone does something terrible when they're truly delusional, no matter what's causing it, are they really guilty? It's a question that still comes up today in law and philosophy.
This deep dive has been quite the trip. We went from Hollywood to a real-life courtroom and everywhere in between. Demons, the legal system, what makes us human, it's all connected.
It shows that the best stories blend fact and fiction, history, and the unexplained. It's all part of the same crazy tapestry.
For anyone listening who heard "The Devil Made Me Do It" and laughed, I get it. But this case, it's a lot more than that. It's about how strong belief can be, how complex our minds are, and how even our legal system has its limits when things get really weird.
It's a reminder that sometimes the most frightening things are the ones we can't explain. They make us question everything we thought we knew about the world and ourselves.
And on that note, we're going to leave you with more questions than answers this week. If you're intrigued, go check out the full story of Arne Cheyenne Johnson. This case still has people talking, and it makes you think maybe the line between what we believe and what's real, maybe it's not so clear after all.